Hi everyone, it's Gary here, and welcome back to another live event here on YouTube for Vegas Creative Software. Today we're following up with the second in our series of August webinars about the software that we released last week. Last week, if you got a chance to join me, then you saw that I talked about Vegas Pro 18, and we went over in pretty quick fashion the new features of Vegas Pro 18. This week, I want to talk about Vegas Post, and specifically, I want to talk about Vegas Effects. Vegas Post Suite was also released last Monday, and so it's been out there for a week now. And many of you have used Vegas Post Suite. Some of you wonder what it's all about. What I want to do today is I'm going to quickly introduce you to some of the new features. Just show some of those on a list. And then I'm going to switch over to the application and talk about really the basics of Vegas Effects because it's still pretty new to so many of you, and there's a lot to get your head around. So I just want to try to help you get a basic understanding of how the system works, how Vegas Effects works, how you get in there, and how you start putting together your composites. So let me switch over to the screen here for a second and show you what I've got. Vegas Post Suite, as I said, released last week along with Vegas Pro 18. And the suite consists of Vegas Pro, and because now this year with Vegas Pro 18, we're including also SoundForge Pro 14. With Vegas Pro, you get Vegas Pro and SoundForge Pro 14 in Vegas Post Suite. You also get Vegas Effects for compositing and video compositing and particle generation, VFX, and so much more. And this is what we're going to be looking at a little bit today. And you also get Vegas Image, and we'll talk about Vegas Image next week during this same time slot. And we'll kind of do the same thing next week as we're going to do this week. Showing you some basics of Vegas Image so that you can get up and running quickly, get your bearings. If you haven't purchased Vegas Post Suite yet, or the earlier version of Vegas Post, you can certainly download trial versions of all of these applications and start using them to see how you like them or see if they will fit your workflow. So let's just take a brief look at the new features that are included in Vegas Effects with the new version of Vegas Post Suite. This is just a list of some of the major features and doesn't, of course, talk about the numerous fixes and performance improvements and all of that that we've also added in Vegas Effects in this new version. But highlights here are the crop and pan effect, a new stabilizer, enhanced motion track effect, and just a list of really nice enhancements that you can take advantage of in Vegas Effects. Okay, let me switch over to the Vegas Effects interface here, and we can start taking a look at how this works. So the first thing that is really important to understand about Vegas Effects is that it is when you're in Vegas Effects, you're not editing video. You're not editing a sequence, let's say. It's not like you're in the Vegas Pro timeline and you're putting clip after clip and you're crossfading and all of those kinds of things. You really need to think of Vegas Effects as working on what we call a composite shot. So you're really taking elements, video, text, effects, other elements, and combining them into one composite shot that's going to be exported from Vegas Effects as a piece of media. So you can do all kinds of sophisticated and complicated effects work, compositing work, particle generation, text and titling and so forth. But it's key to remember that you're not working on a sequence of videos. That doesn't mean you can't add multiple videos to your composite shot. and in fact you can. But you have to separate in your mind Vegas Effects from Vegas Pro, which is your editor, your nonlinear editor, and Vegas Effects is your compositing tool. So that's an important fundamental distinction that you really need to make to really understand what Vegas Effects is and what you'll do with it. Okay, I've brought Vegas Effects open here, and I've obviously just got a blank screen. First thing to know is that you've got several different workspaces in Windows. Right now, I have just chosen the all panels preset or workspace so that you see everything. And you can go through these just like in Vegas Pro. You have tabs to go to these different windows. Now nothing's showing up here because I don't have anything in my project yet, but as we start working along, you'll see the information in those panels change. The panels are dockable, movable, very much like Vegas Pro. You can unpin them from the docking area and let them float. So for instance, this controls window here, I can click the hamburger button and I can float the panel, I can close the panel, I can access help and so forth. So very much like Vegas Pro, you've got all these different panels, or in Vegas Pro we call them windows, and they have their tabs, which you simply just click on or drag to move to a different location and so forth. And just very similar to Vegas Pro, you can save custom workspaces. So if you've got things set up across a couple of different monitors, and you have a favorite setup for your workflow, you can save that and bring it up anytime. Okay, so let's start working with some media here and get a handle on what this concept of composite shot is all about and the idea of compositing and so forth. So on this initial start screen, there are several different ways to start composite shots in Vegas Effects. When you come to this initial start screen, you're presented with these two buttons. Now we could start a blank shot, a blank composite shot with this button. But in this case, let me click the new composite shot from footage button. This brings up a dialog box. I can go choose a piece of media and open it. And when it comes open, you're going to see that it's starting to look, this is where I really encourage you to make sure to keep the distinction in mind between a nonlinear editor and your compositing tool. Vegas Effects is your compositing tool, because what you're going to see here is a very timeline looking area, but this is not a timeline in the sense of Vegas Pro. This is a timeline in the sense of this piece of media. So what you see here is the timeline that this piece of media lasts. And as we start going along here, we're going to start adding different elements to this area. So a distinction between your nonlinear editor and Vegas Effects, your compositing tool, as we start adding things to this this area here, we're not adding tracks as we do in Vegas Pro. We're adding layers. So it's layers of the composite shot. So it's really important just to keep that concept of a contained piece of media that you're compositing into a composite of media. So maybe I should step back and talk about what is a composite. So anytime you have more than one thing on screen at one time, you've got a composite. So for instance, here I've got just a piece of video. So I don't really technically have a composite. I have a piece of video. But if I add text to this, if I add another clip to this and put it in a picture-in-picture in a smaller area, as I start adding elements to this, then I'm starting to create a composite of all the elements that I'm putting in there. And those elements will show up in this list of layers. And there's a lot going on in these layers, and so I want to be careful not to throw too much at you, because as you're beginning, and you start seeing all these controls and numbers and lists come up, it can get pretty confusing. So let's just try to take it slow and easy here. I can click through some of the windows. Here's a text window, so if I wanted to add text to this composite, I can do that. You've got media. If I needed to go get more media, I could go get that. Now I'm in the media window. And one thing that I want to point out is, remember, I added one video clip to this composite shot, but there are two items in my my media window. And basically, one of them is the video that I put in, and the other is the composite shot that I'm creating. Because when we're done creating this and we save it all out, that composite shot becomes a piece of media that we could add to Vegas Pro. But in the meantime, this composite shot could also be added to another composite shot here in Vegas Effects. So you could create a composite that has 20 layers, and then add that as a single piece to a new composite shot that has its own number of layers. So there'll always, your composite shot will always appear in the media window. If I want to import more media, I can click the input button, the import button. Let's just say I add this one, and now you see that added to my list. Now, you also see it show up in my trimmer window. If I click a piece of media, it shows up in my trimmer window, and this works similarly to the Vegas Pro's trimmer window, where I can mark in and out points and so forth. It has not been added to my composite shot yet, right? It has not been added to this composite shot. It's in my media pool, it's in my media window, but it's not in my composite. If I add it to the timeline, now it is in my composite. And here's where you have to remember that we're not talking about tracks here, we're talking about layers. So it is in my composite window, but you can't see it because the top layer is on top of it. If I trim that top layer back a little bit, now you can see the bottom layer. And again, it's just important to continue to make the distinction between layers and tracks. Now I've got two pieces of media in here, and I can start doing some compositing. I can start doing some layering and so forth. For now, I'm just going to remove that second one that I put in there. I right-click it, and I can choose Remove from the context menu. So that I'm just trying to keep it simple so that you just see the one in the composite window now. But we can start doing things to this clip. And as we do things, you're going to start seeing more things line up in the layers window. So for instance, notice that my layer has a little drop-down arrow, and if I click that, I get a number of different things. I can add some tracking, I can add some masks, I can add effects and some transforms and so forth. Let's go ahead and add some effects just to see how that works. So I choose Effects and click the Add button. And let's say I was doing some color grading. So I come over to my color grading category here, and maybe I just want to add this CineStyle effect. So now you can already see the effect that that's having in its default state on my clip. But you can also see that my layer list is starting to grow now. I have my regular layer, my media layer, and that media layer has an effects layer. You can add all kinds of layers. If you click the new layer button up here, you see that you have plane layers, text layers, we'll add one of those later, a grade layer, cameras, lights, all kinds of things that you can add, and we won't get into a whole lot of that stuff now, but just be aware that when you're working on your composite, you've got all kinds of different layers that you can add to this. And as you add those elements to your project here, these layers start to show up, and you can make adjustments. Now, there are a couple of different ways that once you have this effect, for instance, in the project, there's a couple of different ways that you can modify the effect. First of all, there's an effects window. So if I click the effect tab, you can see all the windows, all the effects. So I could have added my effect this way. There's also, history and all kinds of other windows here. The controls window or panel holds all the controls for the selected layer. So in this case, I've got my cine style effect selected, and so here are all the controls for my cine style effect. Now, I actually prefer to use the controls right down here. If I roll down this drop-down list, those same controls are right down here. And I kind of prefer working all right here in my layers list as I'm doing it. But just understand that whatever I do down here, so if I change the S-curve or whatever here, it also changes it up here and vice versa. So you have two different ways that you could work on this. Now, if I was on something other than my single monitor laptop here, I might take this controls window, undock it, and put it on a second monitor, and then I might prefer to use those controls instead of the controls down here in the layer list. But a key thing to remember is when you start feeling like that's an awful lot to look at, just remember these are the same. So you don't have to look at this control window. So in fact, let's put it away for now. Let's bring something else up so it's not causing me visual clutter, because I prefer to use these controls down here. And of course, in my little timeline here, I can scrub through my video. You can see the effect of my cine style on there. I can, do whatever I want here. Maybe make some adjustments, increase my exposure, drop my saturation to 0. Okay, so I can do all of these things with these controls, just as I could up in the controls window up here. I can also add, I can also animate these effects. So for instance, I've just made this black and white. If I want to animate the effect to have some keyframes, I can turn the keyframes on. You now see a keyframe. If you're familiar with Vegas Pro, you're probably familiar with these types of keyframes. And remember, the keyframe just defines the state of my project at a given point in time. So at this location, my project has these settings, including all the saturation having been pulled out of it, so it's black and white. But I can add another keyframe later, and let's maybe change that saturation so it's fully saturated. So I've got one keyframe where it's not saturated and another that it is, where it is. And if I play my project, you can see the color fading in as it approaches that other keyframe. So if you're familiar with keyframing in Vegas Pro, you'll be right at home here in Vegas Effects, keyframing in a very similar way. The system of adding keyframes is a little bit different here in Vegas Effects, but it's similar enough with the keyframes on the timeline, with the controls that you're trying to animate, that you can easily, you'll easily get used to it if you're used to those in Vegas Pro. And if you're not used to those in Vegas Pro, they're easy enough to learn even right from scratch. Okay, so now we have this, this composite shot that we're building. I don't need these controls anymore, so I can close this stuff down. That's what I kind of like about doing it here in the layers list, is that I can close down the ones I don't need, and I can open them when I need them. Now, technically, we haven't really yet created a composite because I don't have another source of video or something else on this. I've just added some effects to it to show you how that works. But let me go ahead and add a text layer. Now I've got a text layer. You can see my text here. Let's type something so you can see it. Here's my text. Okay. And now I have a composite. I have two elements, one on top of the other. You can see at the left side of the preview window, I've got various controls, and when I added that text layer, it switched to the text control. I can switch back to the selection tool, and I can use that selection tool to move my text around. I can use the arrow controls here to move the text back and forth. I can rotate it and so forth using these tools. Okay, so a lot of things that I can do right here, but also if I go to the text window, here are all my parameters. So if I wanted to change the text, the font, or the size, I can do all of that stuff in here. Change my color and so forth. So all of your controls are in the control panel for your text track. Of course, you can also drop down your text track, and you can see all kinds of different controls here as well. And we're just not going to be able to get into all of these controls, but just remember that there are a lot of the drop-down arrows that uncover all kinds of things that you can do with any element that you're putting on the layer list. Okay, so I've got my text here. Let's go back to my text tool and say I'm going to select this. Maybe we'll choose a different font. I'm just choosing one at random here. Okay, let's use that one. Maybe we want it bigger, so we just type something else in there. So it's just typical stuff that we can do here. Now things really start to get interesting when you start doing things like adding VFX like we did earlier when we added the color grading. We've got all kinds of effects that we could add. We can pop things into 3D planes. We can start adding particles and so forth. So let's just say I want to go back to my media and add that other clip to my layer list here. So again, you still can't see it because it's underneath the top layer, but I could come and create a mask. So let's say we've got a mask here, and the mask would show the layer underneath. Let me close my text here, and I added that to the wrong place. Hold on, let's remove that. And let's try it again. Okay, so there's my bus, and I can reorder these layers. So I put it down on the bottom. There it is. And now let's create the mask. And, well, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Clearly I'm doing something wrong with my mask, but I can create these masks and mask out the clip on top so that you can see the one on bottom. The other thing we can start to do is to add, let's go to the Effects tab. And just real quickly, as I said, there are all kinds of effects here that we can add. One of the things that's fun to play around with right from the start are these quick 3D effects. So here I've got this shot with the car coming through, and let's move this over a little bit so it's in color. And I could say, okay, I want to just add some of these particle effects. These quick 3D effects are basically particle effects, particle generators. So let's say I wanted to make it look like it was raining out that day. So I can click that, add it to the timeline, and when I hit that clip, now it looks like rain falling in front of my window. And when you add these particle effects like this, and you start digging into them, there's just so much that you can do here, and so many options that you have that you can really get lost in having fun working with those things. And so you can add them, these quick 3D ones. You can add particles and other items using the particle and simulation tools. And from here, you just get all kinds of options, and you can control the particle emitters, and you can control the direction, and you can control so many parameters. So the key thing to remember is as you're adding all of this to your composite shot, it's showing up in your your layer list over here. You can close down and open the ones that you want to, the tools that you need to get to, and you can carry on with your working like that. So hopefully what I've shown you here is a quick introduction to Vegas effects. I haven't even scratched the surface here, obviously, but I wanted to show you that you can get up and running on a very basic level and just keep track of your layers and keep track of your controls and manage those by closing things down and reopening them only when you need them, to help yourself avoid getting too confused as you're working through here. Because as you see, with all these controls and all these windows and text and all this other stuff, that tracking and all of this other stuff we haven't even gotten into talking about yet, there's just so much that you can add to your projects. Why don't we take this fire and add that, and there's just so much stuff that you can do that it really takes you some time to just take your time and get familiar with what's there. And the key concepts that I really wanted to drive home here are the idea of a composite shot as opposed to a non-linear edited video. So when we're done with this, we go back to the media list. Remember, everything that we've done is being recorded and included in this composite shot. It's just one piece of media that we'll be able to add to Vegas Pro. Now, one of the things that I didn't show you, because we started right out in Vegas Effects, is that when you're in Vegas Pro and you're working on a clip, let's say I was working on this ambulance clip inside Vegas Pro, and I wanted to do all of this stuff to it. So I want to bring it into Vegas Effects. It's very simple to just click the hamburger menu in Vegas Pro for that event and choose Open in Vegas Effects. It'll launch Vegas Effects. It'll bring that clip in as a composite shot, just like I did manually, but it'll do it automatically. And it'll just put it in there and you're ready to go with it. When you're finished in Vegas Effects, if you've brought that in from Vegas Pro, you've gone into Vegas Effects, you've made your changes like all this stuff we've done here, and then you save it and you go back to Vegas Pro just automatically updates with all the changes you've made to this composite shot so that you can just get on with your edit in Vegas Pro. And the beautiful thing about it is, since you've done all this work in Vegas Effects and you've baked it into a composite shot that now sits on the timeline of Vegas Pro, you don't need Vegas Pro to do all this processing. You don't need Vegas Pro to add that cine style effect that I put on it. You don't need Vegas Pro to process the raindrops. You don't need to process the mask, the text. None of that stuff needs to be processed because it's all part of the composite shot here in Vegas Effects. Okay, I know that was a really fast and really high level overview of Vegas Effects, but I felt like it was important because we've never really done this before with Vegas Effects. I felt like it was important to get in here and really show you the basics of getting started and talk about some basic concepts in Vegas Effects. There's a lot here. There's so much here that obviously I didn't even touch. And when you see what people are doing with Vegas Effects, it kind of blows your mind to see what somebody really truly creative can do with this tool. I'm going to wrap it up for today. We're almost up to the half hour. I hope that this helps get you a little bit of an idea of what Vegas Effects does if you haven't used it before. And if you own it already, or if you've downloaded the trial, or you want to download the trial, I hope that this helps to get you kind of up and running a little bit and make your learning curve a little bit less steep with Vegas Effects. Don't forget that we will be doing a similar training next week on Vegas Image. That's one of the other software pieces of Vegas Post Suite. And then for the rest of August, we'll be doing these trainings on Mondays, and we'll concentrate on some more on Vegas Pro, Vegas Image next week, and I don't exactly remember the schedule, but we have them coming up for each week in August. So I hope you'll join me then for those, and I hope you got a little bit of something out of this basic look at Vegas Effects. So thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. So long.